Good evening, everybody. We're going to talk about Parshat Chayai Sara according to the Kli Yakar. And on the front page, which we all have in front of us, I want you to know, when I prepare this shir, when I learn the Kli Yakar, I look at it really as poetry. I wasn't really into poetry. I wasn't really into literature. But you can delve into it, and each word is like a sweet. It's like a really sweet dessert or a really good piece of steak, and you're just chewing it and you're enjoying every word. So I'm going to try to go a little bit slower than I have in the past, so we can really, I shouldn't be the only one enjoying this. I want you guys to enjoy what I enjoy. So the verse says, this is chapter 23 in Genesis, verse 1. I'll read it in English, then in Hebrew. Sarah's lifetime was 100 years, and 20 years, and 7 years, the years of Sarah's life. Now, what's awkward about this verse? Now, I could read it in Hebrew, and I'm not so sure that you'll pick up on it, but I think you probably will, just as well. Vayu Chayai Sara, and it was the life of Sara, Mea Shana, 100 year, Ve'esrim Shana, 20 year, Ve'sheva Shanim, and 7 years, Shnei Chayai Sara, the years of the life of Sara. Any takers to attack this verse, to just feel that there's something screaming out at you?
Why is it broken up like that?
Okay. Why is it broken up like that? Meaning
100 years, 20 years, 7 years.
So Bela, you would tell me Sarah lived 127 years.
Right.
You wouldn't stop in the middle of each number and say 100 and...
Years. 20 years.
Right.
7.
And also, take notice, it does say years. Where? Only by the 7. In Hebrew, that's how actually it works. By the higher numbers, like when you want to deal with shekels and shkalim, so if you have 100 shekels, it's mea shekel. But it's 5 shekel, it's 5 shekels. So the higher number is singular, and the lower number, the under 10, is singular. So that's one of the things he's going to point out. And another thing he's going to point out, he's going to talk about these issues, both of them. He's going to begin immediately by discussing Abraham's narrative, which does not mention, his actually mentions a few words that Sarah's does not. Okay, so you might not have picked up on that, but we'll start with that. So here we go. Vayu Chayai Sara Mea Shana. Okay, that's what he says. But Avraham Ne'emar, if you turn to 25:7 in Genesis, it says about Avraham, Eila Shnei Chayei Avraham Asher Chai. So it's almost the same words, right? Which Avraham lived, right? These are the years that Avraham lived, which he lived. It's like, what does that mean? Which he lived. It's like, what do you need to say? Which, first of all, it doesn't say it by her. Which she lived. So, again, Sarah's lifetime was 100 year and 20 year and 7 year, the years of Sarah's life. But by Abraham it says, and these were the years of Abraham's life, we know he lived 175, which he lived.
Those that were important for the Jewish people are counted differently than those that were not important.
You're 100% right. We may come to explain that a little bit broader, but we're talking about Sarah. We're talking about comparing Sarah's life with Abraham's life. And to me, they're both as important. So by Abraham, it says, Asher Chai, and by Sarah, it does not say those words. So we're saying about Abraham, in which he lived. But those words are missing by Sarah's narrative. So here we go. V'hosiv lomar, Asher Chai. You see by Abraham's narrative, it added the words, which he lived. Ki haya ish chai, because he was really alive. Rav po'olim b'di'at Hashem kol yimei chayav. He was a man of many actions. He was just running around doing mitzvahs and chesed and helping as many people as he possibly can, with the knowledge of Hashem all the days of his life. At what age did Abraham come to recognize Hashem? When he was 3. Okay. Ki ben shalosh shanim hikir boro. As it says in the Gemara Nedarim on 32a, that Abraham was 3 years old when he came to recognize his maker, the creator of the universe. Now I'll just give you a hint. There's commentators that explain, how do we know that? I mean, other than the oral Torah. It's actually written in the Torah. So if you turn, do I have the verse here? Actually, I don't have it in front of me. Sorry, but basically it says, because Abraham listened to my voice, Akev, right? Akev is a gematria of 172. So because, that's how it's translated. Akev, because he listened to my voice. Take it as 172. He listened to my voice. For 172 years, he listened to my voice. He died at 175. That means 3 years he didn't listen to his voice. It was 172 years that he listened to my voice. So this is a support for the oral tradition that Abraham came to recognize and know God when he was 3 years old. Okay. Well, this is very interesting. We're talking about Ishmael. Masha'ein kain ba'Ishmael. Meaning Ishmael did not recognize God early on. We do know that Ishmael did tshuva. He repented later on. Right? Sara felt, understood, had a vision. Whatever it was, there's women's intuition, more than just women's intuition. As Rashi explains, it was through prophecy. This child cannot be around the future little boy, Isaac, Yitzhak. He'll be a bad influence. And he was, he would have been, and he went off the derech, as we say. He went off to a tarbut ra, a negative cultural experience. Okay? He was not a good influence. He would not have been a good influence on Yitzhak. But in the end, Yitzhak himself actually brought Hagar back, and Yitzhak and Yishmael, and as we'll see later on, Ketoret, that's who she became. She did tshuva. It's the same why he remarried Hagar under the name of Ketoret. Hopefully we'll get to it tonight. Very, very interesting how we know that. So now, how do we know about Yishmael? It says, Ishmael shasa tshuva b'voam b'yamim. So Yishmael did tshuva at the end of his days. Sara, we're going to get to in a second. Sara lo ne'emar asher chayata. But it does not mention, we're focusing once again by Sarah's life, it doesn't say at the end of her life which she lived. By Abraham, he really lived life. For some reason, Sarah did not live life like Abraham. They got that mention, special mention. Why? This last line, I'm going to loosely translate. Ki ha'isha yesh la tsar leida v'herayon. A woman experiences a lot of pain through her life, either through giving birth, perhaps even through the pregnancy, the giving birth, and I'll even say through child rearing. And she's always in need of protection by her husband. Therefore, in comparison with men and women, at least here in Sarah's instance, and probably true by all women, that it's not the same, you don't feel the same type of life and really living due to these circumstances. Okay, now what I did do, and I actually have all the details on the back of this sheet. Interestingly enough, I don't remember if he brings it down, so I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to explain it. What did we see? We asked when we said the verse, what do we see? We see these numbers broken down. It started off with the high numbers and then to the low numbers. Who else? As Helen, can I call you Helen? You mentioned, God speaks a certain way about really good people and maybe not so elegantly or nicely about those who are not so special in his eyes. So, in terms of these numbers, and I have the verses here for you can check my own, math and my own investigation. It goes like this. Actually, you know what? He actually goes into detail about this. I'm wondering if I should wait. I'll tell you now, and when we get to it, we'll already be in the know. So it's like this. I'm just looking for my notes over here. I know he's going to talk about it, but anyway, so it's like this. There are certain people, you know what? I'm going to wait because he's going to go into detail about it, and I don't want to ruin it. Okay, Yesh Omrim. There are some that say, Sha'Avraham lo chaya kol yamav ktuvim lo. That Avraham did not live the entire life that was originally allotted to him. Right? God, maybe in his mind, whatever, we don't know, but God allotted to him 180 years, and Avraham died at 175 years. And how do we know this? So he starts by saying, Sharei nichseru min yamav chamesh shanim. There was missing from his life 5 years. Kidei shelo yira es Esav yosei latarbus rav. So he wouldn't see his great-grandchild go out in an evil way. First of all, his own son, Avram's own son, Yitzhak, you know how long he lived till? 180. So usually, and the way it had been up until this time, people were living a long time. I mean, Abraham lived 930 years. Noach lived way over 600. So and on. People were living shorter and shorter amounts. But not that the next generation lived longer than you. Yet in this case, we can see clearly Yitzhak died at 180. Abraham died 175. They could have died at least 180 both. So this is one of the hints from Chazal. We already know from Chazal, they tell us that this story, but you can see it in the math itself, that Yitzhak lived 5 years longer than his own father. L'chach ne'emar, that's why it says, now we're going back to the reason that it says, Asher Chai, that Avraham lived like a really full life, that he actually lived these lives. Ki elu hashanim asher chai, because the years that he did live, he was alive. Miklal, which infers sheyesh od yamim acherim, that there were other years or other days that maybe don't fit in this category, which he wouldn't have lived. Shayu royim elav kefi tivo, that would have been fitting for him in a very natural way, but we'll say Hashem took him out early so that he would not witness his own grandchild going off the derech. That would be very painful for Abraham. So let me just read those words again. Shayuroyim elav kefi tivov lo haya chai behem. That would have been natural for him to have lived, but he did not live in them. Why? Lefi katzru yamav kamar. God cut his life short by those 5 years, as we have mentioned. All right, here we're going to get into that point that I mentioned earlier about the years. Umashanemar b'mispar gadol shana shana lashon yachid. From what we already mentioned, please, thank you, that the higher number, mispar gadol, is shana shana, the 100, the 20. It uses the language shana. You would translate it as 100 year. Lashon Yachid, singular. Mea shana ve'eshim shana. Fine. U'mispar katan, and when it came to the smaller number, or smaller numbers, in this case it's number 7, what word is used? Shanim. Right? It's counterintuitive. So why is that? Why is it? And remember, we're going to talk about the order as well. You started off with 100, then you started in 20, and then at the end is 7, and that's plural. Lefisha chasidim, because righteous people who lived their lives as best as they could for a majority of their life, even though their whole life was very full and complete, nevertheless, yoterheim konim shlemos b'shanim achronim. Nevertheless, you know what happens? Those later years, they acquire much wisdom, right? I think they have an expression about, the kids in college, these guys, when you're young, you're very liberal. But as you grow up, you get to become a little bit more conservative. Let's say wise. Okay, I hope that wasn't too political. Hakroivim, why do they become more complete in their later years? Hakrovim l'shar maves. As they're getting closer to the gates of death, right? And they're closer to the gates of death than they were in their earlier years. See, now he brings two sides to the story. He brings this from a Gemara in Kinim, that from the aspect that the people who are already quite wise, they're studying Torah their whole life, when they get older, God gives them extra wisdom. So I brought down in that Gemara, not all of it is from the Gemara, some of it's from outside the Gemara, the word zaken. Zaken means an old person. So what does it mean? It's like an acronym almost. Ze shekone chachma. When you say zaken, it's because he was koneh. He acquired wisdom. The old person, as through their life. If you ever get on a bus, I'm not sure if it's only the front seat, there may be other seats throughout the bus. It says in Hebrew, you must stand up for an old person. And that's the halacha in the Torah for someone who's over 70, someone who's gray hair. You must stand up for them, even if they're not, in your opinion, wise. They may not be sitting and studying Torah all day. They might not be a professor in university. You're still obligated to stand up for an older person. The other thing that the Maharal explains, that what happens in old age, we don't know because we're all young, but we're getting there, some of us, that the body begins to weaken, and it's almost like as if you're talking about your body and your soul have a certain amount of energy, and the weaker your body gets, the more, let's say, clear, or your soul, your spiritual self kind of is not just awakening, but can express itself more because you don't have the physical body that's holding it down through maybe whether it's urges. I mean, we all have needs. I mean, when you get older also, you have some physical needs, and he's going to explain what I just said in the opposite direction. But I like this pshat very much. The Gemara basically says that hedonistic people, the older they get, their minds soften. Whereas Torah scholars, the older they get, their minds sharpen. Okay? And I mentioned that's brought down in the Gemara in Kinim. That would be chapter 3, Mishnah 6. And then there's another aspect. Hey mitzad sha'az heim hochim miskravim biyot el ur hanitzchi. That as time goes on, they're constantly moving forward and coming closer towards the eternal light. Al kinkol hashanim hakodim heim nichshavim l'shana achas be'erach hashanim achronim. There's a little bit of a twist. Therefore, all of those earlier years are considered as if they're 1 year in value or in relationship to the later years, right? I mean, I can imagine, I don't know, I'm just throwing this out, like if someone was working their whole life and they never really got to enjoy their pension or their grandchildren, their own children, they might not even have gotten a chance to enjoy. But somehow, when it comes to a pensioner, it's a whole new life just opened up. So maybe here too, but we're talking about spiritual matters. In the earlier years, maybe you were not really involved in spiritual things. So that was like lots of hardships. But and therefore it's like a lot. I'm sorry, it's like, when you put it all together, it was like nothing. But what's really coming up, that's valuable. So the valuable thing, you have lots of. So that's why the later years are plural, because there's a lot going on in your life as opposed to what was happening earlier. So just continue the sentence, because it's a very long sentence. The fish mitzad riboy hashlemo shenikna behem gam hashanim domos limerubos. So too, since there's so much acquisition of completion that's going on in the later years, that's why it's plural, as if those 7 years were years, a lot, compared to the 100 or the 20, which was compared to 1. Like, to push to the side in value. Then he comes back to this idea that we're talking about Yishmael. I wanted to focus on that, but it's talking about all the avos. Well, remember Helen mentioned God speaks differently about the people that he really cherishes. So he says, L'chein ne'amar loshen zeh, and this language that we just said of the higher numbers going down to the lower numbers, and remember the higher numbers are singular and the lower numbers are plural, but it's still the same order. He says you find also by Avraham and by Yitzhak. So he mentions where Avraham we saw it's 25:7. By Yitzhak it's 35:28. And also by Ishmael, you can find in 25:17. Remember, we're saying he did tshuva at the end of his life. So if he did tshuva towards the end of his life, that means the end was much more valuable than the beginning, just like any wise person. So he got wise at the end. He wasn't just a wise guy all his life. And he says, Asi Shapir Yoter Mikulam. The actual example of using Ishmael is the best example out of everything he just gave. Ki asa tshuva sof yamav. Because we know that he did tshuva at the end of his days. So I did a little investigation. Now I'll go through those numbers with you. So on the positive side, the good side, meaning the side that they were wise, they did tshuva at the end of their lives. I have a list. I can tell you the numbers, what verses. So then I have on the other side the list of people who are not in that order, and it's pretty consistent. So you have on the side that we're talking about Sara, the numbers are high in the beginning and they go down. So that's Avraham. Everything's in Breshit in Genesis. It's Adam in verse 5:5, Noach, chapter 9, verse 29, Sara in our verse here, Avraham we already mentioned, Ishmael we already mentioned, Yitzhak and Yosef. I only did until Genesis, but here you have until Yosef, and that's on the side of like Sara. Then you have other people who lived, who it's recorded in the Torah, and their numbers are flipped. They start with the small numbers and go up. And who do you have? Most of these are all in chapter 5, because Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mechalel, Yered, Enoch, Mesushalach, and Lemach. And then finally you have in chapter 11, verse 32, Terach, Abraham's father. All in the opposite direction. Okay? Very interesting. So Ishmael is listed with all those righteous people. Okay. So we're going to continue. Now he's going to focus a little bit more on Ishmael. Etzel Yishmael, as we just... Davar Acher. Now he's actually going to flip it. He's going to flip it, and we're going to talk about the opposite. Meaning in the old age, it's not so valuable. So we don't have to focus on that, but we have to know both sides. You got to realize, I know my wife works with older people. Sometimes life, it can be very difficult, not for her, but for the person themselves. As it says in Kohel, so if you look at Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1, it says, V'higiu shanim asher tomar ein li behem chefetz. So remember, I'll read the whole verse. You didn't quote the whole verse. So remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of evil come, as those years arrive, when you say, I have no pleasure in them. So it sounds like it gets harder and harder. And those years are opposite of what we just spoke about. But as we concluded already, the first shot is very consistent with what we have in Tanakh. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit. No, I didn't finish, sorry. That's why, according to this opinion, that the latter years are in plural, larger, say even though it's 7, we say shani. L'fishem yemei tzar, because there's a lot of pain. You get up in the morning. I think there's an old joke, guy, as we get older, there's more and more pains. And but you know what? When you wake up in your pains, you know that you're alive. So it's not so bad after all. Hashanim harishonim nimshul yamim achadim. But the earlier years were, when you were young and you were really vibrant and you were running around the place. So those years are singular, v'havatotam, because of the great love you had for your youth. Okay, so that's Devar Acher, meaning that's an alternative explanation. But as we said, the first explanation is really nice. Okay, so now the second verse. We're going to talk about the name of Hebron, Kiryat Arba. So what does the pasuk say? V'tamat Sara b'Kiryat Arba hi Hebron. Kiryat Arba is Hebron. Sara died. Let me just open the verse. Sara died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Avram came to eulogize Sara and bewail her. So we're going to discuss the next verse for a while. Okay, Sara died in. I didn't read the Hebrew. Utamat Sara b'Kiryat Arba hu Hebron, he Hebron be'eretz Canaan v'yavo Avraham lispod, to eulogize l'Sara, for Sarah, v'lib chota. Now I don't know if your text has a small kaf. Okay, so we're going to discuss that as well. Now there's other names for this location. It's a very holy place. Has everybody been to Hebron? Okay, we have to make a field trip. All right. Okay, there are other names, and we're going to mention them right away. So it's brought down in the Yilkut, in the Midrash. It's quoted as saying, Shehaya lemakom zeh arba shemos. This place has 4 names. Ve'eluhein. And these are the names. Eshkol, Mamre, Kiryat Arba, and Hebron. Now remember these names. We're going to use some parallel teachings and we're going to plug them in. Some really interesting teachings that I hope you take with you. V'amarti litain tuvtam v'dat al arba shemos elu. This is the Kli Yakar speaking. I am going to give a very good reason and understanding about these 4 names. Keep in mind, this place was very special and designated for burial. Al Kain, therefore, Nikra Bar B'Shemos. He's just telling us, he's really going to get into these 4 names and what they have to do, not only with death, but also with life. Kamosh Ne'emar. Now, I skipped something. I'm going to go back. Al Kei Nikra B'Arba Shemos Hamorim Al Arba Drachim Shamisa Mitzoya Behem. He's actually connecting these 4 names. They reflect there are 4 ways that death can be found. Okay, in other words, don't think of this as being very morbid. I know it sounds like we're going to head down into the rabbit's hole, and it's going to be morbid, but it's really life-changing. You really think about it. Kiyesh Misa Sha'adam Meis Becheto. There's going to be 4 listings, 4 different types of death. The first type of death is the type of death that a man dies for his own sin. A man sins. If he didn't sin at all, could be there's a concept that it's only sin that causes death. But in the meantime, we're not going to even go there. We're going to start off by this. Do you have a man who dies for his own sin? He could die. Why? As it says in the pasuk in Bamidbar, in Numbers 27:3, these are the daughters of Tzolafchad. Their father died in the desert. Okay, he was one of those not involved with Korach, and they actually say our father died on his own. He had nothing to do with the group, the congregation of Korach that rebelled. He picked up the sticks in the desert, and he was to be stoned. So he died for his own sin. So the verse says, "Ki becheto meis." They said to Moses, "We don't deserve not to have a portion in the land, just because he's not here." And he wasn't such a bad guy. Like, he didn't rebel. Like, he didn't make a major rebellion like Korach. He died because of his own sin. So there is such a concept, right? Like Boker Tov. If we think that a person can die for his own sins, so what are the other three possibilities? Right? Any guesses?
Carrying the sins of the father to the fourth generation.
Okay, could be. Could be.
I mean, we're hoping.
Through violence, someone delivering some kind of mortal blow.
We're talking about reasons, not how.
Oh,
And he just died for his own, live out his full life.
What are you saying?
That someone, not for their hate, but lives out their destiny, their whole
Okay. Dies of natural causes.
natural causes.
It is going to be, hopefully, the third one. Okay, ready? This is like a real eye-opener. Yesh misa ba'avon acherim. People die on account of other people's sin. Kamo habanim hanitpasim ba'avon avihem. It's kind of what Helen was saying. The Gemara over there in Shabbos 32b mentions that a wife might die on account of her husband's oaths, or children might die on account of the oaths of their parents, or the lack of mezuzot, or the lack of tzitzis, or bitul Torah, not learning Torah. Sinat chinam causes hatred within the home, in the parents' domain. Robbery, or delaying or preventing, or perversion of judgment, if the father was a judge, or holding back. So a child may suffer. But here the concept is just to understand there is misa on account of others. There is death that could be attributed to other people. And we saw, and as it is said, one second, just like we saw there. And then there's another concept along with that, v'tzadik nitpas ba'avon hador, that a righteous person can actually die on account of a generation. For example, Rav Gurion in the same Gemara, Shabbos, Lamed Gimel 33 Bet, says that tzaddikim are punished for the sins of their generation. Okay? Okay, so that's the second type. You have number one for your own sins, number two on account of others people's sins. V'yesh, the third, v'yesh asher bli avon yirutzin min ha'olam. This is more like what Baylor was talking about, the natural causes, but they're righteous. They're righteous. Mitzad hamisa hativiit upeirud arba yesodos. On account of, right, from the aspect, this death is a very natural death, and there's just a separation from the four elements. It's time for the soul to go back to its maker, and the body, which is made up of the four elements, go back to the earth. But there's a separation of the soul from the body, and we'll call that natural. But that means that the person is not a sinner, and he's not dying on account of anybody else's sin. Just natural death. He says something fantastic. He says that anything that is combined, its eventual end will be to separate. That's like anything that comes together is eventually going to separate. V'yesh misa neshika. The fourth category is, it sounds also morbid, but it's not. It's called the kiss. And we'll call it the kiss of death, but obviously we're talking about a misa that comes through a kiss. Hu misa tzadikim shemesim b'neshika. This is a kind of death for those who are totally righteous, and they get it through this kiss. In other words, it's just like pulling a hair out of a glass of milk. It's that simple, a kiss. But what's unique about a kiss? Two people come together and the lips touch. So now we get to the first hint of what we're going to start matching up these four names. So he says, V'hu lashon chibur. When you have the two people coming together for a kiss, here in our case, from Hashem and the person passing on through the kiss, a chibur. Chibur means, Well, we know that it's related to the word chevron. It means to come together in unity, to cling, to mechaber, to unite, to be bound. So this is the kiss is binding up, dveika is cleaving to Hashem in the most amazing way. The inyana, and its concept is Ka'asher ta'aleh machshavto v'nishmato, just like it would go up in his own mind and his own soul. V'tidbak lamala b'seichel ha'poel, that his goal was to cling, to really cleave above through his most spiritual, active intellect. Kevan shalashuv lo yored. So once he goes up, he doesn't come down. Ki tishaer nishmato mechuberet shama. Because what remains is his soul will be connected up there. We're talking about somebody must have gotten to the point in the deepest meditation, deepest clinging to Hashem with his soul, and it goes up and it's just with God, and it doesn't want to leave. It's having an intimate moment that just will not, it'll just last forever. And therefore what happens is the soul does not return. Okay, now we have the 4 different types of death. Types, meaning categories. Someone dies on their own, someone dies on account of others, someone dies, we'll say, of natural causes, but that means they're not a sinner. And the 4th category is so lofty, we'll call it the kiss. So he says, Hu kinegdam bo arba shemus elu. And parallel to these 4 types of death are these 4 names. Hochim al mine miselu, that they're going after, they're following in the concept of the 4 types of death. So what's mamre? What does mamre mean to you if you hear that word? We're going to say that's keneged hameis becheto. That's going to be parallel to the person who dies for his own sin. Why? What does mamre mean? Miloshen mamrim. It's the verse in Deuteronomy 9:7. Sorry. Mamram ha'itim im Hashem. The part of the verse says, you've been rebels. The word is like a zakein mamre, someone who sits on the Sanhedrin, someone who sits on the Poston. He's in the minority, and he follows his own opinion. That's not as drastic, but what he ends up doing, he starts teaching. He starts preaching. He starts getting people to follow him. He's outright going against the court. That is called a zakein mamre, and he is to be eliminated from the midst. So the word mamre means rebel. So when someone sins, he's going to die because of his own sin, because he's a sinner. He's rebelling against Hashem. So he's in the category of a mamre. And he says, Umaloshen zakein mamre. As I mentioned earlier, there's a concept of this rebellious elder. Okay, now eshkol, keneged hameis ba'avon acherim. This is parallel to where someone dies on account of someone else. Okay, a death occurred because of someone else's sin. Shikulim mimenu. The word shikulim is bereaved. The person is missing someone else. Someone else dies on account of him. Ki hakoire banav koroi shikul. That when someone is koiver, when someone is burying their own children, they're called bereaved. Just like it says in verse, this is all in Breshit, chapter 27, verse 45, Rivka is having a small conversation with Yaakov. And she is sending him off to, the north. She says, Lama eshkol gam shnechem yom echad? Why should I bereave of both of you in one day? Okay, this is what Rebecca tells Yaakov as he was fleeing from Esav. Kizeh choite v'rav mori nisha shakul v'yechidi minzeh asher humat ba'avono. It's this guy. He's one particular guy sins. He's a sin. Right? There's a sin involved, and he's very bitter. And what remains? He remains bereaved and alone because of this sin that someone else had died. Someone dies on account of his sin. Al kenkar l'makamu eshkol. That's why the place Hebron is also called Eshkol. Al odos hashkol asher karto min ha'olam ba'avono shel zeh. This is regarding this bereavement which someone is cut off from the world on account of this sin. Okay, what's the other name? Kiryat Arba. Now we're at the third name, Kiryat Arba, Al Shem HaMisa Tevi'it, Perud Arba Yisodos. We talked about the natural death is releasing the soul from the four elements. The body makes up, whatever they are. What are they?
Earth, wind, and fire,
and
water.
Okay, you got four. That's what the body's made up of. A lot of wind. Some people have more wind than others. Okay, so there you have the four elements. Ki adam ir katana ukirit arba. So a man is a small, the word ir katan, a small village, a small town, that's referring to his body. There's a verse that talks about many inhabitants. Okay, but the ir katan is referring to the body like a small world, a small village. Now we're at Hebron. Okay, Hebron, al shem hachibur v'mitat nishika. Because of the chibur, this ultimate unification, I like that, unification with Hashem, that you just are not going to let go. And therefore the neshama does not return to the body. Finish, nishika, a kiss of death.
So the sins of others, can we go over that? Is that like for instance, murder?
Say it again?
When someone is murdered, where does that fit in?
Meaning, it could be, look, there's a Gemara goes through it, right? There could be an accidental murder, it could be a real murder. It could be the person's deserving of murder. It could be the person is a tzaddik and is not deserving of murder, but he's dying on someone else's account.
I'm thinking of terrorism right now. So where does that...
He said, I think when he says about dying for others, he does mention two things. One is, let me just go back where he says it. When he talked about dying for others...
But you're not dying for the sins of others.
He says two things. It could be one particular person who's, let's say, a close family member, as that's the Gemara usually gives over there. But also it says, tzadikim nitpas ba'avon hador. A person could die and absorb what's really supposed to happen to everyone else onto him. So, but we don't know, we cannot judge. We don't know. God knows. This person was a tzaddik or he was really deserving. Our eyes are shielded. We cannot judge. Only God judges. So we see this person, he died in a car crash and his head got cut off. So we could say, the Gemara gives example. This guy was guilty of something where he should have gotten beheaded. But there weren't any witnesses, so God took care of it. Right? That could be. But who are we to judge? Or he was a tzaddik who absorbed the sin of the generation. So we should never make that judgment unless we're prophets and God revealed to us, which is not usually not the case.
So does he ever get the reward in another lifetime?
The tzaddik who absorbed the sin, absolutely. Even more so. Even more so. Even more so. Okay, now we're going to talk about Umisas HaTzedek is Sara lo ha'asa mitzad shnei minim harishonim. What does our verse say? Read our verse. Sarah, right? Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. We just listed 4 names, but in our verse where she died, 2 names are listed. Which 2 names? Kiryat Arba, which we said is related to the natural death. The soul leaves behind, sheds the body, and the Hebron is, let's say passive, and one's a little bit more active in running towards and clinging to Hashem. And those are the 2 names of the city in which she died, but we're going to use them as adjectives to describe her death. So the death of this righteous woman, Sara, our mother, was not from the aspect of the first two which we mentioned, which relate to sin on some level, whether it was the sin of the person or the sin of someone else. No, nothing about her death involved sin. Ela mitzad shnei minim asher b'li avon yerutzun. Rather, her death resulted as from the other two types of death, which is without sin and a running forth. That's why it says, "V'tamat Sara b'kiryat arba hi Chevron." That's why she died in a place called Kiryat Arba, which is Chevron. Beautiful. Lo hiskir ki'im shnei shemos elu. And the verse does not mention anything but these two names. Why? Because her death was a result of those two aspects. Dahainu aide perud arbas yisodos, through the shedding of the earthly or physical four elements, ubeneshika v'chibur, and through this kiss. Again, kiss of death sounds really bad. So the kiss that really unified her with Hashem, Ka'amor, as we have mentioned. Okay, what time is it? I'd like to go on because there's some really good stuff here. Okay, so then it says, Abraham came to, this is the same verse, this is the end of that verse, that Abraham had come to Lispod Lasara Vilibchota. Came to eulogize her. Doesn't say her, it says her name. He came to eulogize for Sarah and to cry for her. Now so what's the first thing that is shouting at, screaming, it's saying something is really awkward in this verse, and what is it? Like we had in the previous, we saw, after we learned it, we saw, okay, I can see that now, right? Everyone sees what we talked about before. We're going to do the same thing with this verse. As soon as we point it out, you're going to say, I can't believe I missed that. So the word Sara is hiknis bein dvekim. It shouldn't it have said that he came to eulogize and cry for her, for Sarah? It doesn't. It says he came to eulogize for Sarah and cry. So he says it should have put, why does Sarah in the middle there? Why is there a break here between the two actions that Abraham is doing? Kikula muyutar. Actually, not only that, everything is extra. So not only is it like her name is in the middle, we don't even need her name. Why? Ki hayalomar could have just said to eulogize her with like the lispodo, the livchota, to eulogize and to cry. Understood her in the word. Her name is not even necessary. First of all, if you read right from the two verses, her name already appears 3 times, even without this. Sarah's lifetime was 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. The life of Sarah's life. Sarah died, so that's already the 3rd time. So why at the end of the verse that he came to eulogize and cry for her? We would already know. So the word Sara here is like really like extra. So not only is it like sticking in between these two actions, but you don't even need it at all. So why is it there? Gam b'kol makom hibchi kodem lehespid. Not only that, wherever you find in the Torah, what always happens? You always have crying before the eulogy. Right? You have, even in our own mourning period, it's a 7-day mourning period, that's for the eulogies. But you get over the crying in the first few days. The crying is for the most intense part of feeling the loss, and it slowly dissipates. So here he says, every place, all over the Torah, you always find first the cry, then the eulogy. But in our verse, what comes first? The eulogy and then the crying. He says, Ukan mukhlefet hashita. But here it's a switch in the concept. Ki b'kol makom shlosha livchi v'shiva lehespid. In Moed Katan, that Gemara deals with the laws of mourning, And we know that the first 3 days are for crying. That's the human response. The immediate, pain is felt. And as time goes on, it's not forgotten about, but eventually, after a year, most of the pain has been released and forgotten. So he says, veneer, it seems. Lefish v'chol mate, whenever we're dealing with someone who dies, that you're always going, as time goes on, I think they say time heals all wounds. Okay. But as time goes on, the pain is less. That's what he says. The mourning period goes and continuously diminishes. You're talking about first intense 3 days, then you have the whole first 7 days, then you have a 30-day period, and the prohibitions or the types, the customs in mourning become alleviated, they become easier, become lighter, until the 11th or 12th month, depending if it's a parent or not.
Then you become a pro.
Okay, you ready for the next? Chas v'chalila. Okay. Ki birabot hayamim hakol nishchach. Because through the increase of days, meaning as time goes on, everything is forgotten. Amnam tzedekidzu. Therefore, however, for this particular righteous woman, everything was the opposite. Kol yom v'yom hirgishu b'yoter b'heder shalo. That every day that passed by, Avraham felt the lack more and more. Every day that he was not with his wife, she was buried in the ground, it just pained him. That's love, right? Mitzad ha'eder torata u'maaseha hatovos shenevdav l'doro. From the aspect of the lack of her Torah and her great kind acts and all the mitzvahs that she did, they were lost to that generation. Al kain hiktim hesped lebechi. That's why our verse switches and puts the hesped first, the hesped first, the eulogy, and then the bechi, because for him the order was from, I'm not going to say light to harsher, but that's the concept, that every day that went on, he just felt the lack. The amount of love and gratitude and connection he had to her just grew on him as the days went on. Furthermore, Chazal say in Gemara Sanhedrin, Kol ma shemesa ishto rishoina, that anyone whose first wife dies, ki'ilu chara beis hamikdash biyamav. It's as if the temple, the actual temple, had been destroyed in his lifetime. Al kain mitchila bo lispod l'Sara ba'avora. Therefore, he came first to eulogize Sara on her account. Avalo bachela, but he wasn't crying for her. Ki yoda shiyala lalamaron. He knew she went to a great place. She went to heaven. L'makom yakar v'nichbad, to a very dear, priceless, and honorable place. Ma'asher hayasa bo ba'aretz pal yazu, that she went to a great place, much better than this dark, foggy earth. Va'akachach bocha al habeit hamikdash shenichrav biyamav, and then he started crying on the account, as we said, it was ki'ilu, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Then he really felt the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed in his own lifetime. Kigam malachei shalom mar yivchayun al churbano. Gemara Chagiga says when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the angels themselves went into wailing and crying. So too here as well. Kain darshu olav. There's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah 13:17. If you want to write that down. So just part of the pasuk says, "My eye will drop with tears." But I wrote the whole verse here. And if you do not heed this, my soul will cry in its utmost chambers. We're talking about Hashem. And we talk about Hashem. We're talking about the Malachei angels as well. The Gemara explains the Malachei angels were also crying because of your haughtiness. And if tears will flow freely, my eye will drip tears, for the flock of Hashem will have been captured. That's referring to the exile. Obviously, we're talking about the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, and everything that follows is a very painful very, very painful for Hashem. So we're talking about the loss of a wife. The first wife is extremely painful for the man. It's as if the base of Mikdash was destroyed. Al kain hifsik mamilas l'Sara. That's why there's a break by putting the word Sara there, right? We said to eulogize, for Sara, and to cry. Lefi shehabechi haya al shenidma lo ki'ilu nikra beis hamikdash biyama. Because that crying was as if he imagined and lived through it, as if the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed in his life. Ready for the small kaf? Asher haya gavoa me'ama. Remember, what is the Beis HaMikdash? In Gemara Midos, in the Mishnah Midos, it says that it was 100 amos high. Al kain bo haremez. That's why the kaf, it's one letter that we say is 20, but if you spell it out, it's kaf pei. Kaf pei is 20 and 80. So kaf pei is really, the kaf is, and it's not just a regular, it's kaf katan. It's small. Ki kaf ola mea, even though kaf comes to the gematria of 100, it's rota lomar, it's coming to say, ki ilu nitma'at, I have to read this, nitma'atu otan me'ama v'nasu katanim. That diminished, it became small. That 100 amos, and it became very small through its destruction. So there's a small kaf representing this concept of the wife who passes on to the man. It's as if his own, not his own, the temple was destroyed. Any questions?
Last sentence, that paragraph, no? 3 words in?
Okay. Ze remez yakar. Remember, this is the Kli Yakar. So he likes to end off this idea of this is a very nice vort. This is a really nice explanation. Here he says this was a good hint, a nice, precious hint. Okay, any other questions? All right, have a good Shabbos, everybody.